Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are not just exploring a topic, we are stepping onto a battlefield.
We really are.
And I don't say that lightly. If you are listening to this right now, chances are you have felt it. You felt that something in the machinery of our society, specifically the legal system, is fundamentally broken.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe you've seen a buddy go through a divorce where he lost everything, his house, his kids, his reputation, all despite doing nothing wrong, and you just had to watch him crumble.
Yeah, it is a story we hear constantly.
Or maybe you are a landlord who literally can't get into his own property because the law seems to care more about the feelings of a squatter than the actual deed in your hand.
Right.
Or maybe you just look at the news, you see the sentences being handed out, and you think, since when did feelings become more important than facts? Well, today we're going to the root of that rot. We're doing a deep dive into an ebook that is, frankly, explosive.
Explosive is the right word.
It's titled English Law Devolution: From Natural Masculine Order to Feminized Chaos. And it is written by Conrad Riker.
It is a highly provocative title, to say the least.
Yeah.
But having gone through the text extensively, I think provocative is almost too mild a word.
I completely agree.
This is essentially a war report. Riker isn't writing your standard dry legal history here. He is arguing that the legal system hasn't just evolved in some way that we might find annoying. He posits it has been hijacked.
Hijacked.
Yes. He argues that we have moved from a system built on masculine principles, things like logic, hierarchy, consequences, order, to a feminized system that is ruled by emotion, victimhood, and what he terms safetyism.
Exactly. And before we even get into the weeds here, I need to tell you, the listener, if you are the kind of person who wants to understand the why behind the madness we see in the courts and the culture, you need to own this book.
It is essential reading.
We are going to cover a ton of ground today, but we obviously can't cover everything. So right now, or while you're listening, open up a new tab, go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books, and buy English Law Devolution: From Natural Masculine Order to Feminized Chaos.
Go get it.
Support the author, and while you are at it, make sure you like and subscribe to this deep dive right now. Because the algorithm, well, it does not like the kinds of truths we're about to unpack.
Not at all.
You will also want to follow the author on Substack, at Conrad N. Riker. That's at ConradNRiker. Okay, housekeeping done. Let's get into the red pill moment.
Let's do it, because this really is a red pill moment for anyone who studies our institutions. Riker frames this deep dive and the book itself as a wake-up call for men who are just tired of watching civilization burn while the courts hand out participation trophies.
Yeah, the central premise hits you like a freight train right out of the gate. Riker says law is not neutral, and I think, we tend to think of the law as this blind, impartial machine, right?
Right. Lady Justice with the blindfold.
Exactly. And we have this ingrained idea that the law is just there, like gravity, unbiased and perfectly fair.
That is the ideal we're all taught in civics class. But Riker argues that law is actually the living will of a civilization. And just to be clear for the listener, we are impartially unpacking Riker's arguments today. We aren't endorsing every political viewpoint, but we are looking closely at how he maps this out.
Right. Our mission is to break down the source material so you understand his thesis.
And his thesis is that for Western civilization, specifically English law, that living will was shaped by men. It was shaped by war. It was shaped by the harsh necessity of survival.
Survival, meaning it wasn't a luxury.
Exactly. He argues that the old system, this masculine order, wasn't about being mean or tyrannical. It was about architecture.
Architecture. I really love that analogy. It feels solid. Break that down for us a bit. Why architecture?
Well, think about a bridge or an aqueduct. Riker uses the Roman aqueduct as a prime example early in the book. A well-built aqueduct doesn't care if you are thirsty. It doesn't care if you're having a bad day. It doesn't weep, as he puts it. It just functions. It delivers water because it is built strictly on the laws of physics and structure.
Gravity works whether you are happy or sad.
Precisely. And Riker argues that a legal system should be exactly the same way. It shouldn't be an emotional support animal. It should be a rigid structure that holds society together through clear hierarchies and unavoidable consequences.
So if the aqueduct starts worrying about whether the water actually wants to flow downhill...
Or if the stones feel oppressed by the weight of the stones above them.
Right. If it starts doing that, the whole thing just collapses.
It collapses. The structure relies entirely on rigidity. If you introduce fluidity into the stone, the bridge falls. And this leads us to the first major pillar of his book, which is the foundations of masculine order. To explain this, Riker actually takes us all the way back to the Code of Hammurabi.
Okay, an eye for an eye. That is the classic example of barbaric, ancient cruelty. I mean, that is how it is always taught in school, isn't it? As this primitive phase we supposedly evolved past.
It is taught that way. But Riker flips that script completely. He asks the reader to analyze the concept of an eye for an eye through the lens of order rather than modern morality.
Okay.
He says this wasn't cruelty at all. It was calibration. It was physics applied to human behavior.
Calibration. Okay, explain that. How on earth is blinding someone calibration?
You have to think about the world before written law. It was incredibly tribal. So if you blinded my son, I wouldn't just blind your son.
You want revenge.
Right. I am angry. I am grieving. I might go and kill your entire family in a fit of rage.
And then your cousins would come and burn my village down.
Exactly. Escalations, the Hatfields and the McCoys, blood feuds that literally last for generations and destroy whole societies.
Total chaos. Just uncontrolled feedback loops of violence.
So the law steps in, Hammurabi steps in and says, no, stop. One eye, not two, not your life, just the eye. It puts a hard cap on the vengeance. It creates a closed system where the debt is paid, and then order is officially restored. It stops the bleeding, both literally and metaphorically.
That makes so much sense when you frame it that way. It acts like a circuit breaker.
A circuit breaker is a perfect way to put it.
It prevents the surge from frying the whole electrical grid. It is about limiting the damage, not expressing your personal feelings of vengeance. It's saying, here is the price, you pay it, we move on.
And Riker points out that the Mesopotamians clearly understood that uncontrolled emotion breeds anarchy, whereas controlled consequence breeds order. It is a masculine containment of emotional excess. And he connects this seamlessly to the Roman tradition. We really have to talk about patria potestas here.
The power of the father. Now let's be real for a second. In the modern world, we hear father's authority, and we immediately are trained to think of tyranny. We think of oppression, the patriarchy with a capital P.
We do. But Riker emphasizes that in Roman law, this authority was fundamentally about responsibility. The paterfamilias, the head of the household, was the judge, the jury, and the executive of his family.
But why?
Not because he had a massive ego or wanted to be a tyrant, but because he was solely responsible for the disorder of his house.
So if his kid messes up, the dad actually pays for it.
Exactly. If his son broke a window or committed a crime against a neighbor, the father paid the restitution. The father answered for it. The state didn't deal with the child at all. The state dealt exclusively with the father.
That is extreme ownership.
It is the idea that authority and liability are inextricably linked. You simply cannot have one without the other.
Which is fascinating because Riker contrasts this with the modern feminized view, right? Where everyone wants the authority, the rights, the voice, the platform, but nobody wants the liability when things actually go wrong.
That is a key distinction he makes. Today, the culture demands the freedom to act. But if it goes wrong, we want the state to bail us out. We want all the fun without the hangover.
Yeah. In the Roman view, the father is the wall that protects the family from the chaos outside, but he is also the one who keeps the chaos inside from spilling out and affecting society.
And Riker puts it beautifully in the text. He says, structure over sentiment. A well-built aqueduct doesn't shout. A legal system shouldn't weep. It should function. If the legal system starts weeping for the criminal, it immediately stops functioning for the citizen.
That is a heavy thought. And this brings us right to the English tradition, the Magna Carta. 1215, Runnymede. I think a lot of people have this really fuzzy, romantic idea of the Magna Carta as this moment where everyone held hands and decided on human rights and modern democracy.
Yeah, Riker essentially shreds that idea entirely. He calls it a proto-BLM manifesto interpretation.
Proto-BLM manifesto.
Which he argues is absurd and historically illiterate.
Yeah.
He argues the Magna Carta wasn't about universal rights or democracy at all, not even close. It was a strict contract between strong-minded barons and a king who was overstepping his bounds.
So it was a labor dispute, basically, or a management dispute among the elites.
It was a power check. It was entirely about enforcing hierarchy and duty. The barons weren't sitting there saying, oh, we're all equal to the peasants.
Right.
They weren't saying every voice matters. They were saying, King John, you are violating the structure, you are violating the ancient customs, you are violating the law of the land, and we have the swords to force you back into compliance.
So it was masculine accountability. It wasn't asking for permission. It was demanding adherence to the written contract.
It was. And it established that even the king is subject to the law. But the law wasn't some vague feeling of fairness or equity. It was a very rigid set of rules. And this leads right into the logic of common law. Riker talks at length about how English law was built on deductive reasoning.
Like the Socrates syllogism.
Right. Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal.
Classic logic.
And Riker points out this isn't just a philosophy trick you learn in college. It was the operating system of the courts. He argues that for centuries, law was about starting with a firm principle, applying it strictly to the facts, and arriving at a necessary conclusion.
A necessary conclusion. So the judge isn't sitting there thinking, well, you know, Socrates is a nice guy, he's got kids, maybe we can make an exception on the mortality thing today.
Exactly. There was zero room for whim, no space for personal narrative, just truth, derived logically. If the logic holds, the verdict stands, regardless of how sad it makes us feel.
And this is what Riker calls the masculine basis of law.
Yes, it is binary, true or false, guilty or innocent.
And this brings up Koch's doctrine. Every man's home is his castle. This is a phrase we use all the time in modern English, but I feel like we have completely lost the actual legal weight of what it means.
We absolutely have.
Yeah.
Sir Edward Koch articulated this in 1628, and Riker reminds the reader that this wasn't poetry, it wasn't a metaphor. It was a hard legal defense of sovereignty.
Sovereignty of the individual man.
It meant that within the walls of your home, you were the king. The King of England's messengers could not kick down your door unless there was a literal felony in progress. It defined the home not as a shared emotional commune, which is how Riker phrases it, but as a fortress of male sovereignty.
A fortress? That word implies defense. It implies hard boundaries.
It implies that the outside world and the state stops at your threshold. It is the ultimate expression of property rights and privacy. But now, Riker argues, the fortress has been breached, and not by an invading army, but by an infection.
And that is the perfect transition to section 2 of the book, which covers the shift. Riker calls it the devolution from reason to emotion. How did we lose that fortress?
Riker's very clear on his timeline here. He says this wasn't a sudden, violent revolution. We didn't just wake up one day and the laws were different. It was a slow, deliberate infection by what he calls gynocentric ideology, which he defines as a mix of feminism, Marxism, and postmodernism.
It is the classic boiling frog scenario. You turn the heat up 1 single degree at a time, and the frog just boils to death without ever jumping out of the pot.
Precisely. And the core of this infection, according to the book, is the inversion of the fundamental legal question.
Okay, what was the question?
It used to be, is it just? But now, Riker says, the question has become, does it feel fair to the victim?
Is it just versus does it feel fair? I mean, that sounds subtle to a layman, but legally, that is a massive chasm, isn't it?
It's the difference between objective reality and subjective experience. Just implies an external standard, something that can be measured against a written code or a logical principle. Fair feeling is totally internal, and it's ever-changing depending on the person's mood.
Right.
Riker points to the case of R.V. Brown in 1993 as a critical tipping point in English law.
Ah, yes. This is the one involving the, let's call them enthusiastic hobbyists.
Yes. It involved a group of men engaging in consensual sadomasochistic acts. It was entirely private. There was no coercion, no permanent injuries. Everyone involved explicitly said yes.
So, logically, under Koch's doctrine, my home is my castle. This should be completely fine. It is private men doing private things in a private space.
You would think so, but the House of Lords ruled that their consent didn't matter. They were criminalized.
Wait, I really want the listener to grasp this. So they all agreed to it. Nobody was complaining to the police. Nobody wanted to press charges. But the court stepped in and said, no, you are criminals. Why?
This is Riker's key insight in this section. The court ruled that consent didn't matter because the behavior challenged the order of society. But it wasn't the masculine order of structure and boundaries. It was the new order of safetyism.
Safetyism.
It signaled that the state now felt completely entitled to police private consensual behavior if it found that behavior distasteful or out of control. It was the state acting as a mother hen, saying, I don't care if you want to do this, it is not good for you.
So it moved from protecting rights, like the right to do what you want in your own castle, to enforcing subjective social norms. That is genuinely terrifying. It means your consent is legally irrelevant if the state thinks you are being naughty.
Correct. And from there, Riker tracks the rapid rise of what he calls the therapeutic state.
The therapeutic state. I feel like I live in that state every single day. Every HR meeting feels like a therapy session now.
It is everywhere in our institutions.
Yeah.
We have seen the shift from retributive justice, which is punishment, to restorative justice and transformative justice.
Healing circles.
Healing circles instead of prison cells. Riker argues this represents the death of mens rea, which is the legal concept of the guilty mind.
Break that down for us.
In traditional law, to be guilty, you had to intend to commit the crime. If you accidentally bumped into someone on the street, it wasn't assault because there was no intent. But now, with things like the Racial and Religious Hatred Act of 2006, you can be prosecuted for offending feelings completely regardless of your intent.
Let me get this straight. So if I say something, and I mean no harm whatsoever, maybe I am just stating a statistical fact or personal opinion, but you feel harmed by it, under this new framework, I am guilty.
In the eyes of the therapeutic state, yes. The victim's feeling defines the crime, not the perpetrator's intent. The locus of the crime has shifted from the action of the accused to the emotional reaction of the accuser.
That is the ultimate weaponization of feelings. If my legal safety depends on your emotional state, I am never safe. I am always at your mercy. You could just decide to be offended.
And that is exactly the point Riker is making. The power dynamic shifts entirely. He quotes the Lord Chief Justice in 2022, who actually called for empathy-based justice.
Empathy-based justice.
Yes. And to Riker, and frankly to anyone who deeply understands the history of common law, that is an absolute contradiction in terms. Justice is supposed to be blind. Empathy is inherently biased. If a judge is empathetic, they are naturally siding with the person who cries the loudest or looks the most pathetic.
And who usually cries the loudest in these legal scenarios. It is rarely the stoic man.
Exactly. Riker argues this system naturally, almost biologically, selects against stoicism and masculinity. Judges are viewed now as approval-starved therapists, rather than cold, objective arbiters of law. They want to be seen as kind rather than just. It is an ideological shift where the judge is essentially performing for the audience, validating their emotions.
Okay, let's talk about where this really hits the ground for a lot of guys listening. Property.
Oh, yes.
Section 3 of the book deals with the destruction of property and contracts. This stuff makes my blood boil because it is so tangible. This is the stuff you work your whole life to build.
It should make you angry. Riker presents some very stark data here to back up his claims. He notes that 68% of rental properties in England are owned and managed by men,
Okay.
but 82% of tenant advocacy groups are female-dominated.
Wow. So you have men owning the land, taking the financial risk, and women running the political groups that want to control that land.
Riker argues this imbalance isn't accidental at all. It is purely ideological. He frames modern legislation like the Renters Reform Bill and the attack on Section 21 evictions as land grabs disguised as compassion.
Give us the anecdote about the Bristol landlord. I think that really paints the picture of what this looks like in practice.
It is a tragic story. Riker writes about a landlord in Bristol, a quiet, hardworking man in his 60s. He had tenants who didn't pay a single penny in rent for 3 entire years.
3 years? How does he pay the mortgage on the place?
He didn't. He couldn't. He went bankrupt. The local council blocked the eviction under a vulnerability clause.
Vulnerability.
The tenants, it was a woman and her sister, claimed they were vulnerable.
Vulnerable. They were living rent-free for 3 years in someone else's property. That sounds like a pretty secure setup to me.
But in the eyes of the feminized law, their emotional and social vulnerability completely trumped his legal documented property rights. He told Riker during an interview, "I worked 40 years to buy that flat. Now I can't even enter it."
Unbelievable.
Riker uses this specific case to illustrate a broader point. He says that ownership creates builders, while tenancy creates guests. And the law is now entirely favoring the guest over the builder.
Guests don't build civilizations. That is such a powerful line from the book. If you are just a guest in society, you don't care about the long term, you just care about your comfort right now. You don't get up on a ladder and fix the roof, you just complain to the landlord that it's leaking.
And the psychological cost of this shift is very real. Riker cites a 2021 study linking male homeownership to significantly lower rates of depression. Ownership gives men a sense of domain, a sense of sovereignty. When you strip that away, or you make it conditional on the mood of a housing tribunal, you are attacking the male psyche at its root.
You are turning him from a king in his castle into a servant in his own home. He takes all the risks, and the state gets to decide who lives there.
Exactly. And Riker points out it is not just real estate. It is the death of the contract itself.
Yes, the death of contract. I mean, commerce relies on contracts.
It does. Riker points to the Uber case in 2018. The drivers had a clear contract, they were self-employed, they read it, they signed it, but the tribunal ruled they were actually workers entitled to benefits, and they cited dignity and control in their ruling.
Dignity. There is that word again. It sounds really nice on a bumper sticker, but what does it actually mean legally?
Riker says dignity is a legal Trojan horse. It has no strict objective definition. So it allows activist judges to rewrite perfectly valid contracts based on what feels nice in the moment. Feminized law demands perpetual renegotiation. Just because you signed a document doesn't mean it's binding if you feel unhappy about it 3 years later.
So the contract is fluid, just like everything else in this new system.
Exactly.
And prenups. I know a lot of guys listening think a prenup is their ultimate safety net. They think, I'm smart, I've seen the divorce rates, I got her to sign the paper, I'm safe.
Riker says, think again. He argues prenups have been totally gutted by a system rewarding victimhood. He points to the heavy influence of feminist legal theorist Catherine McKinnon. She views contracts traditionally as instruments of male dominance.
So just the act of making a contract is oppressive.
Her view is that men inherently use contracts to trap women. So if a man tries to protect his hard-earned assets with a prenup, the family courts often just set it aside if they feel it leaves the woman unfairly disadvantaged. Completely, regardless of the fact that she willfully signed it while having her own legal counsel.
So your signature means absolutely nothing. Your word means nothing. Only your relative status as a victim matters to the judge.
Correct. The contract is just a piece of paper. The feeling is the actual law.
This bleeds right into the most painful part of the book for a lot of our listeners, I'm sure. Section 4, the legal war on men and fathers, the family court system.
This is where Riker really pulls no punches. He describes the modern family court system as a gynocentric theater.
Gynocentric theater.
And the stats he brings up back him up, especially on the secrecy aspect.
A
2023 review showed that 98% of family court rulings in England are secret.
98%. In a supposed democracy. That is terrifying. Secret courts are the literal hallmark of tyranny. If the public can't see what the judge is doing, how do you know it is fair?
You don't. It allows for zero public accountability. And the primary weapon used in this secret court, according to Riker's research, is the concept of safety. Or rather, feeling unsafe. It has become the ultimate legal leverage to deny fathers access to their own children.
I feel unsafe. It is the ultimate trump card. It just shuts down any rational argument. And it's not just about physical safety anymore, right? We are talking about the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021.
Yes, that act is a major turning point in his timeline. It redefined coercive control to include things like silence, eye-rolling, or not texting back.
Wait, I want to make sure the listener heard that clearly. Not texting back is legally considered coercive control.
Under the new guidelines, yes, it can be framed as withholding affection or emotional abuse. Riker calls this witchcraft, dressed in legalese.
Witchcraft.
It takes normal human friction, or even a man's stoic withdrawal from a heated argument to cool down, and criminalizes it.
So if you get into a screaming argument with your wife, and you decide, you know what, I'm going to go for a walk and not answer my phone for an hour so I don't say something I regret, that is abuse.
In the hands of a hostile lawyer and an empathy-based judge, absolutely. It is interpreted as you controlling her emotional state by withholding your attention. It frames the man's silence as an offensive weapon, rather than a mature de-escalation tactic.
That is pure insanity. It criminalizes the very tool men have used for centuries to avoid violence, which is walking away. And the result of all this legal engineering is mass fatherlessness.
Riker hits us with the statistic. 85% of youth offenders come from fatherless homes.
85%. That is the most damning stat of all time. We know the result of fatherlessness. It is crime. It is poverty. It is generational chaos.
Yet the state continues to heavily fund programs that treat men as the primary problem. Riker argues this is suicidal for a civilization. We are actively removing the one variable, the father, that statically predicts success and stability for children. And we're doing it all in the name of protecting women's temporary feelings. The state is essentially saying we would rather have broken criminal children than temporarily unhappy mothers.
It is staggering when you lay it out like that. But it's not just in the family courts, though. It's creeping into the criminal courts, too. Riker talks about the My Plan app. This sounds like something straight out of Black Mirror.
It really does.
Yeah.
This is a government-funded app designed to help women safely document abuse. But the prompts it gives the users are things like, he ignored me, or he was silent. It actively encourages the logging of behaviors that are often just being a man, being quiet, being stoic.
Wow.
Riker calls it a state-sponsored spy tool for relationships. It trains women to view their partners as permanent suspects.
And what about the Smile case? Please tell me that is an exaggeration.
I wish it were. Riker details a 2022 case where a British man was ordered by a court to pay damages for refusing to smile at his ex-partner during a handover of their child. The judge cited it as causing emotional distress.
He was financially fined for not smiling.
Correct.
If that doesn't definitively prove we are living in a feminized chaos, I don't know what does. A man's facial expression is now subject to police regulation. Smile or pay up.
It is the literal criminalization of masculinity. Stoicism is interpreted as hostility. Silence is violence. And affirmative consent laws push this even further. We are rapidly moving toward a world where you need to sign a notarized form before holding hands on a date.
Right.
Riker also mentions the 2017 revenge porn laws. He notes that they criminalize the sharing of images that were initially sent consensually. Even if there's no or ever spoken, the context of the relationship changes, and suddenly the man is a criminal retroactively.
It is an absolute minefield for any man trying to navigate modern life. And Riker argues this isn't just happening organically in the courts, it is being intentionally taught in the universities. This brings us to Section 5, institutional capture and the death of truth.
Yes, the death of truth in academia. Riker focuses heavily on the decolonizing the curriculum movement in law schools. They are actively removing William Blackstone, the historical father of English common law, and replacing his texts with Kimberly Crenshaw, the sociologist who founded intersectionality.
Let me process that. So we are trading the brilliant mind who built the foundational legal system for the sociologist who invented a way to rank people by victimhood. That seems like a civilization-ending trade.
It's catastrophic for the integrity of the law. Riker recounts a really telling anecdote about a decolonizing the law conference at Sussex University. At this conference, logic itself was denounced as a Western colonial construct.
Logic is colonial. That is, how do you even argue with that premise?
You can't. That is the dark beauty of the trap. If you try to use logic to argue against it, they just smile and say, see, you're using colonial tools to oppress us. It is a completely closed loop of ideology. It's a Kafka trap.
Right.
And it is not just abstract theory anymore. Birmingham University is now requiring law students to keep reflective journals on how legal decisions feel to them.
Dear Diary, today the verdict in the tort law case made me sad.
Essentially, yes, they are training future lawyers to act like social workers.
Yeah.
They are training them to prioritize empathy over written statute. And if a student or professor tries to fight it, they get canceled immediately.
Of course.
Riker mentions the very public cancellation of the masculine basis of law lecture at the London School of Economics. It was shut down entirely due to safety concerns.
Safety concerns. There is that magic phrase again. We can't have this intellectual lecture because it makes people feel unsafe. It is just intellectual cowardice masking as morality.
Riker calls it ideological quarantine. He argues this is the narrative machine at work, and it extends far beyond the campus into media and tech censorship. He brings up the Luke Harlow case. This was a man utterly destroyed by the media over false accusations, and when he was finally proven innocent in a court of law, complete silence from the press, no apology, no retraction on the front page.
Because innocence doesn't sell clicks. Anger and outrage sell. And the predetermined narrative was man bad, so when the facts finally said man innocent, the media just ignored it and moved on to the next target.
Exactly. And big tech reinforces this narrative machine. Riker claims that Google algorithmically buries men's rights forums. He specifically mentions a site called Legal Insight UK being actively pushed down to page 10 in search results, while feminist advocacy sites are artificially boosted to the top.
Which completely controls what the average person thinks is the consensus.
Right. He also brings in the Twitter files, showing how legal journalists like Scott Greer were shadow banned for simply criticizing gender ideology in the law. And Riker draws a very chilling parallel here to China's social credit system.
This was the part of the book that really kept me up at night. He says, we are currently building a Western version of the social credit system.
Yes. But instead of being run overtly by the Communist Party, it is run covertly by algorithms that are trained on feminist grievance data. If you are flagged as toxic or misogynistic by an AI because you posted a thread about fathers' rights, you could be shadow banned, debanked, or socially ostracized without ever facing an accuser.
It's a digital panopticon.
It is a panopticon designed to enforce the new feminine order. It quietly monitors your speech, your spending, and your online behavior to ensure absolute compliance with the therapeutic state.
Okay, we have painted a very, very bleak picture here. And usually on most shows, this is where the hosts would say, well, let's just vote harder and hope things get better. But Riker doesn't do that at all. He offers a very militant solution. Section 6 is the counterattack, rebuilding the legal order.
It is a call to arms. Riker emphasizes this heavily. He says this book is not a lament. Men must stop apologizing. That is step one.
Stop saying sorry.
Stop apologizing for being male. Stop apologizing for being strong. Stop apologizing for wanting order and hierarchy. Riker proposes something very specific structurally: the Men's Legal Association.
A brotherhood of lawyers.
Yes, a formal, tight-knit network of judges, solicitors, and barristers who explicitly reject the feminized order and commit themselves to restoring natural masculine law. He wants to bypass the captured institutions and revive the guild system.
Like the old Inns of Court in London.
Exactly like that. Bypass the modern universities completely. Bypass the ideological reprogramming of modern law schools. Bring back the old model of apprenticeships where young men learn cold logic, classical rhetoric, and ethics directly from older, experienced men.
Iron sharpening iron.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Creating a parallel structure, because the old one is simply too rotten to save from within.
That is a brilliant strategic idea. If the university well is poisoned, stop drinking from it. Dig your own well. Train your own advocates.
And he goes even further than that. He calls for the complete abolition of family courts.
Tear them all down.
Abolish them. Return all domestic and family disputes to common law courts with public juries of your peers. Total public scrutiny. No more secret rulings behind closed doors. If you want the state to take a man's kids away and seize his property, you have to prove he is legally unfit to a jury of 12 regular citizens. Not just convince a single state-appointed judge who just finished an empathy training seminar.
Sunlight is always the best disinfectant. Make them make these arguments in the light of day.
Exactly. And then Riker pivots to the individual listener. What does he say to the guy listening to this podcast right now? He outlines the individual's duty. Refuse to accept false accusations. Fight for every single inch of ground. Refuse to bow to ideological bullying in your workplace.
Meaning, if HR calls you in for some vague microaggression, you don't play their game.
Do not confess to appease them. Do not apologize. Demand hard evidence. Record the meeting. Stand your ground and force them to prove it legal.
Hold the line.
And finally, he connects all of this to the very survival of Western civilization. He argues quite convincingly that civilizations are defended and maintained by fathers. Fathers provide judgment. Fathers provide hard boundaries. Mothers provide nurturing and unconditional forgiveness. Now, you absolutely need both in a healthy family unit. But Riker argues that a state cannot be a mother.
A state must be a father.
A state must be a father. It must judge objectively. It must punish transgressions. It must maintain the defensive wall. If the state becomes a mother, it unconditionally forgives the violent criminal and ends up punishing the victim for complaining about the lack of safety. And historically, Riker notes, that is exactly how Rome fell.
Wow. A state must be a father. That line is going to stick with me for a long time. It perfectly encapsulates the entire argument.
It really does. And it brings us to the final provocation of the book. Riker concludes his thesis by stating that a world without justice, and he specifically means masculine, ordered, logical justice, is not a world of peace and love. It is a world of endless conflict and raw revenge.
Right, because if the formal law won't settle the score fairly, men eventually will settle it themselves.
Exactly. Nature abhors a vacuum. If the aqueduct stops delivering water, people will eventually smash the stones to get to the river. And that is a brutal place none of us want to go back to.
It's the difference between the aqueduct and the flood. Order versus chaos. Listen, we have genuinely just scratched the surface of this book today. We have given you the broad outline, but the granular detail in English law devolution, from natural masculine order to feminized chaos, is just staggering. The historical case studies, the deep legal history, the sheer force of Riker's argument. You really need to read it for yourself to fully arm yourself for what's coming.
Absolutely. What we did today was just a summary. The book itself is the actual weapon.
So here's your marching order for today. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now. Do not wait. Search for Conrad Riker, buy the ebook, read it, highlight it, then go to his Substack at Conrad Renriker and subscribe to his newsletter. Join the community he is actively building. And finally, if you got value from this deep dive today, please rate and review this show with 5 stars. It is the only way we get this message past the big tech algorithms that are actively trying to bury it.
The war for the soul of law is being fought right now. And as Riker says at the end of the book, it is being fought in the minds of men like you.
Do not let them win. Stand your ground. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We will see you on the next one.